Well, let's now talk about the seven-eyed model of supervision. I really have to acknowledge that there are several other models of supervision which you will find in the textbooks or which you might end up discovering in your own practice. You might see people referring, for example, to the Proctor's three-function interactive model. You might find people referring to the Kadushin's process model, which we spoke about actually when we spoke about the functions of supervision. And you might find a few other models out there, models of supervision, really just to remind us how broad this field of practice is. So the seven-eyed model is something we are insisting on in these lectures because actually it offers a number of advantages. One of them is this model is quite comprehensive. It's quite detailed as well. It's very thorough and very detailed actually by nature. And I personally like it because of these reasons. So this model really builds on seven modes of supervision or seven core types of activities you might find happening in a relationship of supervision. The first of these modes is the client. And this is really just about the client broadly. You are thinking about the client, how they present their history, things such as the referral, how did they come to you, and the broader system underpinning their issues or the problems you've been working on with them. So the second element or the second mode under this model is the intervention you are implementing to help that client. So this is really about considering the strategies or the interventions that you as a social worker are undertaking with that client. So it's also the opportunity for you, to reflect on your work with that client. So you might see the supervisor asking you what you are doing, and then you can tell them about what you've been doing with that client. And then you can even consider getting their feedback on what else could be done under those circumstances in working with that client. And you might even engage in a role play and get feedback on your practice with your supervisor. So the third mode under this model is really the relationship with the client. So the relationship with the client, as you know, it really matters, and sometimes it gets to determine the outcome of practice. And what we do actually under this mode, we draw on a number of theories informing practice, trying to understand, for example, the different things happening during practice. We can draw, for example, on psychodynamic, humanism, transactional analysis. And again, the idea here is really to get to understand what kind of relationships are we having with the client. You might find, for example, transactional analysis being quite helpful in this context. So you might see the supervisor asking you whether, how you would describe your relationship with the client. Would you describe it as a two adults relationship and adult to adult relationship, or would you consider it as, you being the adult or the parent and then the client behaving like your child, and those kinds of things, really. And in many cases, metaphors might be used to get to understand the relationship with your client and, what happens really whenever you are in contact with the client. You can see people employing metaphors such as, for example, what kind of animals you feel you are when you're with your client. And definitely, again, this is just really a metaphor to symbolize the kind of relationship you are really, really having with your client. And I think that matters really to practice because many of the things which are happening while we are practicing social work, while we are in contact with the clients, some of these things will be quite unconscious, and some of them will be even come out of intuition. Some of them will be simply intuitive, and unless we really get focused on what is that which is happening in the relationship, then we are missing an important aspect of evidence-based practice. So the fourth element is about you as a social worker. So sorry, here we have caseworker, but because that's exactly the concept that Hawkins and Shohet, who elaborated this model, have used. But here it's really broadly about you as a social worker. It's about how is the social work affected by the work with the client, in terms of what's happening here, and what's that really which is affecting you in the way you engage with the client. So it's about how are you as a social worker, and again, in relation to being between the client and your supervisor, and what kind of dynamics are you really experiencing in that context? Is there any projection which you feel like is going on, or is there any element you would describe as transference in your relationship with the clients? Or are there any other, things which you have noticed in these relationships, and how are they affecting you? And what's that happening? Are there times where you find yourself crying at night because of what's happening in the lives of your clients? So it's pretty much how the work is really affecting you personally as a work. And again, this is also very important to consider in a supervision. And I think supervision is the right space to discuss, to have those kinds of conversations. So mode number 5 is about the supervisor and the worker's relationship. Um, so this mode really focuses on the kind of relationship you as a worker are having with your supervisor. And here, the supervisor attends closely to the quality, the tone, and the emerging dynamics of the supervisory relationship itself. And this can include anything such as noticing how the relationship is developing over time, whether there have been tensions or whether there have been improvements in the kind of relationship you had started developing early on. And the key question here really is whether the dynamics showing up in supervision are connected to what is happening between the social worker and their clients. Because it's also properly, it's also possible that what you are experiencing with your client is exactly also maybe what's happening whenever you go to meet your supervisor. And here you see the concept of parallel process, being used, um, just to describe how you end up being like in two separate processes where you have exactly the same thing happening and affecting you. So an important element also for mode number 5 is how power gets to play out in supervision. As we started saying, and as we shall be saying later, so supervision is one of the areas of social work where we see a lot of power and authority and even hierarchy playing out. So supervision is inherently shaped by power relations, and we cannot avoid that. And these must be acknowledged, they must be discussed, and they must be managed ethically. And if you feel like, oh, supervision is just becoming, too much, or there is now a lot of, aspects of power affecting my relationship with my supervisor, then that's the space to have those kinds of conversations and see how you can work through the power relations and how power operates to work through a proper and productive supervision relationship. Mode number 6 is about the supervisor. So this is really about them as a supervisor, and it's about them really getting to think about how are they feeling themselves about the supervision relationship. And it's really pretty much working on scanning my feelings as a supervisor and my own experiences. What is it like to be a supervisor to this new social worker? Do I feel overwhelmed sometimes? Do I see them sometimes as a burden to my work? Do I see them as taking too much of my time? They can't learn fast, and so on and so forth. Again, it's about you as a supervisor. How are you feeling about the process? What is it that you are learning? And pretty much what kinds of emotions are you having while having a meeting with the supervisor? Now, with your supervisee, sorry. Now, I have to insist here that this can be a bit challenging because the tendency can end up being like questioning your supervisee, or trying to ask them what are they feeling about the supervision meeting. And if they tell you they are feeling well and maybe you personally as a supervisor are not feeling well, then you can end up trying to challenge them, and that's a very big risk. It's always pretty much important to strike a balance between my feelings as a supervisor and the potential feelings of my supervisee. So checking in shouldn't be, an opportunity to try to challenge or question the supervisee, because again, that can lead to problematic so many problems in the supervision relationship. So mode number 7 and final is about the broader context. That's really the wider socioeconomic, cultural, and structural organizational context that shapes all of these other elements of the supervision. And again, here really, this is just an incredibly vital part of every supervision session. Supervision should be considered in context. It cannot be taken in isolation, because as we started saying early on, it's never only about the relationship between the supervisor and the supervisee. There is still the broader organizational context out there, the policies we are trying to align to the broader professional discussions which are shaping practice, and even the challenges and frustrations and all of the political dynamics we are navigating in becoming practitioners. All those sources of stress cannot be ignored, even in supervision. And again, I think supervision is the best place to have all of these kinds of conversations. So this is just, again, one model of supervision developed by Hawkins and Shohet, and you don't have to take it in any particular order other than just considering all these steps and all these considerations which go into supervision and how they are not mutually exclusive, but also how they are simply complementing each other. And I believe that can be really helpful in your practice. Thank you very much.